Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Oxygen for the Soul. This is Oxygen for the Soul. This is actually Coffee Talk, and I'm drinking a tea. The point of this particular class session was designed really to kind of explore philosophical issues, questions. Excuse me. Baruch. I'm good. All right. All right. So, the point of this class was to have conversations about philosophical issues so that we could clarify these things for ourselves, meaning we were practicing Jews and we are believers, but when it comes to like the core fundamental ideas that are the backbone of Judaism, we don't really know what they are, and certainly we struggle to articulate them. If you met a nice Jewish neighbor, your neighbor in the street, it says to you, explain to me like what you believe in, and Jews, I often find them fumbling and stumbling and not knowing how to have that conversation. And the point of this talk series is really about like, okay, this is what we believe in. Over the last few weeks, we spoke about free will, and we dealt with the big question is, well, how do we have free will in light of God's omniscience, all-knowingness, and so on and so forth. We brought some philosophical examples that explained why free will was so important in a Jewish system. We quoted the current modern-day philosophers that say that if we have no free will, you have no justice system, you can't penalize anything of anyone, and so on and so forth. But look back at those recordings, and maybe at the end of this class we'll go over through some of that. Some people had questions. I'm happy to go through those things at the end of the class. But today we're dealing with a different kind of question. So we went through the idea of belief and free will, right? Like, do I have the choice to believe in God? Is that something that is predetermined? Are some people just born believers in God? Are some people more susceptible to being atheistic or whatever their persuasion is? Or do human beings have the power of breaking out of the cycle that they're in, allowing them to choose what they want to or don't want to believe in? Are you Jewish just because you were born into a Jewish faith? Or is it something that you chose for yourself? Is it something can you walk away from? And my question is, that we're going to be dealing with today, is can you command belief in God? Can I command you to believe in God? It's an interesting question, meaning like, well, belief in God is something that you come to believe on your own, right? Can you command it? And that's what we're going to be dealing with today. There's actually a huge machloket, which means a massive argument between sophisticated rabbis who have dealt with this particular topic and issue. And we're going to go through the two main ones, which is Maimonides versus Nahmanides, the Rambam versus the Ramban, two amazing scholars coming from different perspectives. The Rambam, Maimonides was a philosopher and certainly a rationalist. The Ramban, also a rationalist, but his rationalism is centered in mysticism and Kabbalah. Okay, so what is the source for belief in God? So the first source is in the Ten Commandments. It says, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, Asher hotzuticha mi'eretz Mitzrayim mi'beit avadim. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the house of your bondage. Okay, now, this is one of the 10 commandments. Does this sound like a commandment to you? Read it. Is that a statement or is that a commandment? If you were to write a commandment, what would it sound like? Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not this, or keep that. Anochi Hashem Elokecha, this is part of the 10 commandments. I didn't know that. This is a statement, Rabbi. Why is it written that way? It's a strange way to write something. If it's part of the 10 commandments, it's got to be something you command. Right? That's what it seems like. Sorry.
I thought there is.
I have one over here, and I left some over there. I didn't. All right. So let's look at source number 2, Sefer HaChinuch. Okay, the Sefer HaChinuch was a book written by a rabbi for his son, for his bar mitzvah. He wrote him a present where he explained all of the mitzvot in the Torah and gave them ta'amim, he gave them explanations and reasons. Okay, can you imagine giving that as a gift to your kid? So he authored this book for his son. He says as follows. He said, the mitzvah to believe in God is to believe that there is a single unitary God who brought into being all that exists by his power and desire, and that he is eternal. Furthermore, that he brought us out of Egypt and gave us the Torah. Okay, fine. Let's break that down for a second. So, for me to believe in God, it means that I need to believe there's one God. I don't believe in gods. Okay, I believe that everything that I see and experience around me is an expression of his desire and will and his power. He's infinite. He's eternal. Okay, and in addition to that, all that jazz, he is also the God that brought us out of Egypt and gave us the Torah. Why is that second part important? I understand the first part. Believing in God means believing in an eternal being, that everything exists is an extension of. Why do I need that second part over there? Why is that part over there that he brought us out of Egypt and gave us the Torah important? Right? We kind of like, I didn't know we were speaking about this. We spoke about this morning, but it's the same idea. Meaning, if you believe in God, all that does is get you to a designer. That the universe has design. Okay? And therefore the world has purpose. How can the purpose serve its purpose if that purpose is not communicated to us? And the answer is it cannot be understood. Therefore, the purpose of creation cannot express itself until there is something called Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah. They go together. Okay? Now, what's interesting is that Matan Torah also is connected to Yetziat Mitzrayim, to the Exodus, to us leaving Egypt. The question is why? Now, look at that verse again in the first source number 1 in Exodus. Anochi Hashem Elokecha asher hotzeticha mi'eretz Mitzrayim. I am God that took you out of the land of Egypt. Why say that? Why not write, I am the God that created the universe? Right? Egypt's a small little thing, like you're focusing on Egypt when you have the whole entire, I created the atom, nuclear energy. I created power. I created so many things. Why is Egypt the benchmark of introducing yourself to me? Well, one answer is that God is not interested in just being the God of nature. It's that he's the God of our people, which means that he is intimately aware of what happened in Egypt, which is why he took us out. Therefore, there's justice in the world. Not enough to believe that there's a God who created the world that we have to believe in, but he's a just God. He's a God that took us out of Egypt because there was injustice happening in Egypt. And therefore, it's not just a belief in a God that, okay, he took us out of Egypt. No. But the fact that God was aware of what happened in Egypt means that he is aware of my suffering. We don't want to just believe in a God who's out there in the cosmos building the universe. There's a God in the universe that is intimately aware of me right here, right now. Yeah.
What is like in a time frame of saying, this is it, I'm aware of, speaking, okay, so saying Hashem is aware of all that's going on, why is 210 years?
Why did it take so long?
Time frame, I know you would probably say that time is different in different realm.
Time is time.
How do we come to terms with when the answer shall up?
How long does justice need to take to be served? That's your question. Meaning, okay, fine, they were enslaved. Why did he wait 210 years for them to get to a point where there was so much injustice? Now remember that the idea of the Jewish people sacrificing their children to build the pyramids happened at the end of the slavery, not at the beginning. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? So like the injustice, first it was like a light slavery. Light work, light loads, you're working for us, whatever it is. But then it became a full-fledged fire and brimstone kind of slavery where we're destroying your families and we're killing your kids, throwing all the firstborn.
They decreed that.
The Egyptians decreed that, right? So that happened later in the exile, and therefore, once we got to a point where there was hopelessness, or if you think of the story, look back at the story, right? Amram was the name of Moses' father, divorces Yocheved. right? They get divorced. Now, why do they get divorced?
Not actually.
Why?
They're not put in a position to do that.
To sacrifice their kids. What Amram was really saying, I give up. Take off his kippah. He's like, I'm done, I'm out.
So that's when Hashem intervened?
Once the Jewish people got to a point where they were at the breaking point, they were ready to give up, that's when God begins to intervene. Now, what does he do? He doesn't come in and say, stop right now. This act of divorce, of lost hope and newfound hope, gives birth to Moses. Right? That union of Amram and Yocheved creates Moses, the leader, to take the Jews out of the land of Egypt. So it wasn't like an instantaneous, here I am, boom. God wants there to be a process. Why? Last week you'd have remembered that God creates a world so that you and I can have free will. If every single time there's an injustice, God, boom, zaps somebody, there's no free will. There has to be a system where there is suffering. Because suffering, my friends, and the nature of evil is what allows us to have the doubt of God's existence. That doubt is what gives us the ability to choose. If there was no doubt, there would be no choice. You have no choice but to believe in God. So he creates a reality where what is perceived as being evil, right, means that God is not involved. But God says, I'm watching and I am taking a tally of everything that happens. And at some point, justice will be served. Justice was served. Okay, so let's see how Maimonides deals with this in his Sefer HaMitzvot. We're in source number 3. Okay, the first commandment is a commandment in which we were commanded to believe in God. That is, we must believe that there is an originator and a cause who is the catalyst for all existence. As God said, I am the Lord your God, quoting our verse here and also in Deuteronomy. And at the end of Tractate Makot, that's the Talmud, it is written, 613 mitzvot were said to Moses at Sinai. What is the verse that hints to this? Torah was commanded to us through Moshe. Right? Torah tziva lanu Moshe. That is to say that the numerical equivalent of Torah was given to us through Moshe. The Gemara then asks the following rhetorical question. How much does the word Torah equal in Gematria? The answer is 611. So where are the other two? An explanation to that is the two commandments, I am Hashem, your Lord God, and you shall have no other gods, which we heard directly from the mouth of God. Thus, it is made clear that I am the Lord is part of the count of 613 mitzvot and the commandment to believe as I've explained. Which means two things. One is that the gematria, the numerical value of Torah, equals 611. But we know there's 613 commandments. So he says, well, the first two commandments of the 10 commandments were actually uttered by God. Right? And therefore, we don't need a written form of those commandments because the Jews actually heard those things. Now remember, what we're claiming as Jews is that not only were we enslaved in Egypt and freed from the Egyptians, there was something called the splitting of the sea, which was the greatest miracle, more great than all the miracles combined in Egypt itself. And in addition to all the miracles, do the miracles prove God's existence? No, they don't. The miracles are just a break in nature. They don't prove anything, right? Because what is miraculous is something that defies the frequency of nature. Nature is just the frequency of time moving over and over again, and a miracle is the break of that frequency. Okay? But the proof of God is in the fact that He had communicated with humanity. That's it. There's no greater proof of that. It's very hard to deny that you and I are having this conversation right now. The fact that He communicated with the Jewish people. Not with one person, not with Moses, but with the entirety of the people itself. And Maimonides is saying, and therefore, there is a commandment to believe in God. Anoch Hashem Elokecha is a command to believe God. And therefore, if you ask Maimonides, can you command belief in God based on this Sefer Mitzvot? He would say, yes, you can command it. And what's the problem with commanding it? How do I get to that belief? It's like a weird kind of thing. You must believe, and therefore what? Like, therefore I just believe? So let's see how the Ramban Nachmanides deals with it. And he writes this in the Sefer HaMitzvot. And he says as follows: it seems that the view of the Baal Halachot Gedolot, the Bahag, is that the count of 613 commandments are his decrees. May he be exalted, and may he that he decreed upon us to do or to refrain from doing. But the belief in his exalted existence that he had made known to us with signs and wonders and revelation of his presence before our very eyes, this is the central point, the root from which all commandments are born. This was not listed in the 613 commandments. And he gives a parable, and I'll explain this. A parable of a king enters a country, and his servants tell him, "Make decrees for them." He responds, the king, "If only they would accept my reign, I would make decrees upon them. Because if they do not accept my reign, how can I fulfill my decree? How can they fulfill my decrees?" So God said to Israel, "I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods. Just like you accepted my reign, so to accept my commandments. You shall have no other gods." Accepting the kingship of God is one matter, and the commandments and decrees is a whole other matter. So he's saying that Ramban is this two-step process here. Can you command the belief? No. First, the Jewish people have to accept that there is a God. Once they accept there's a God, then we can go ahead and accept the commandments themselves. You see how that works? Now, I often say this to people, like, okay, well, if you're Jewish and you believe in God, that obligates you, does it not? Right? So, well, what are you actually doing? What do you believe in? If you believe that there is a God, then you must believe that the communication that God had with the Jewish people is part of the belief itself. And therefore, if you believe there's a God, then you got to believe the Torah is true as well. And if you believe the Torah is true, then you got to believe that the commandments are true. What are the commandments? Anochi Hashem Elokecha is not a commandment, it's a statement. Hey guys, that's why it doesn't say you must believe in God. It just says, I am God. And then it says, there shall not be other gods before you. And therefore, according to the Ramban, Nachmanides, Anochi Hashem Elokecha is not part of the 613 commandments. It is a statement that God made. It's the precursor to believing in God. Just like in the metaphor in the story, a king says, I'm happy to make decrees, but they first got to accept me as king before I make my decrees. Otherwise, what's the point of making these decrees? They're pointless. Right? So, okay, fine. So you have a machloket, Ramban versus Rambam. Two different opinions. Maimonides says, up until now, part of the 630 commandments you can command. You can force people to believe. Ramban says, no, it doesn't work like that, my friends. First, you got to accept there's a king. Therefore, Anochi Hashem Elokecha would be read as a statement. Then he continues. Look at number 5. I am the Lord your God. This statement is a positive commandment. He said, I am the Lord, in order to instruct and command the Jewish people that they should know and believe that there is a God. That is to say, he exists and always existed, and everything came into being through his desire and ability. He is their God, whom they are obligated to serve. God said to the Jews, I am the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods. In other words, God said, it is I whose kingship you accepted, and yourselves in Egypt. The Jewish people replied, yeah, it's true. God said, well, if you accept my kingship, then you should accept my laws. That is, after you accepted after you've accepted and agreed that I am the Lord your God, and saved you from Egypt, now you have to accept my mitzvot themselves. Now, this is a very tall order. Okay, because think about it. We're saying, okay, believe in God, believe in the Torah. Do those two things go hand in hand? For most people, they don't. Right? Think about our parents. I'm not sure what your parents are, but like our parents are very deep believers in God. But they struggle with, well, what does that really mean? Practically, does that mean I got to keep kosher now? Does that mean that I got to keep Shabbat now? Does that mean what does that mean, believing in God? If my belief obligates me in certain things? It can't just be I do whatever I want with my belief. Then it's not real belief. Then it's just you doing what you want to do, and you believe in nothing but yourself, right? And therefore, when we talk about commands and commandments, God, believe in God, there's a process here. If I believe there's a God, if I believe there's a designer that designed the universe, I must believe that the world has a purpose. Therefore, that purpose had to have been communicated. That communication happens with Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah. Now, so God created a world with purpose because there's design. So it must be the Torah itself is a communication of what he wants us to do. Why do I want to do it? Because I want to live a life of meaning. If you met someone who is a super genius, an IQ of 250, which I don't think exists. But let's say someone with an IQ of 250, the guy with super genius level intellect, and studied everything in the world. Wouldn't you want to go to him and ask him for advice about what you should be doing and should not be doing? Would you be a fool for not taking his advice? Okay, God has an intellect of a trillion. Super intellect. We can't begin to understand his intellect. When he says not to eat pig, why is he saying that? Well, we could come up with whatever reasons we want, but when you're dealing with an infinite intellect, are your reasons going to be the reasons? No. Right? A child comes up with all kinds of conclusions about the world they live in. Are they an expression of truth? Maybe parts of it, but not all of it. Why? Because they're limited. Think about yourselves. Think about where you were 10 years ago and what you understood about life and the world around you versus where you are today. How ignorant were you 10 years ago? How ignorant were we 20 years ago? Right? We were babies. We knew nothing. Don't you wish you could take what you know now and bring it back to wherever you were 20 years ago, 25 years ago? What kind of decisions would you make? How different would they be? They'd be very different. What kind of people would we become? Very different kinds of people. Right? So we're saying that, okay, fine. If we believe there's a God, and therefore that truth obligates me. This is what Maimonides says. He says, Oseh emet b'pnei shehu ha'emet. I do what is true because it is true. If you believe that this is true, then that truth obligates you. What's the obligation? Well, at the very least to study this stuff, at the very least to try to commit yourself to practicing this stuff, right? And therefore, no one's arguing about whether or not we should believe in God. The question is whether or not it's a commandment to believe in God. Can I fulfill the commandment of believing in God? Do I get a mitzvah for believing in God? Well, it depends. If God didn't command it, is it a mitzvah? No, it's not a mitzvah. If He commanded it, then I get a mitzvah for believing. Just the fact that right now I'm thinking about believing in God, I get brownie points in heaven, whatever that means. Okay? Now, we don't think of it in these philosophical terms, but we need to. That's why Jews have always had these philosophical conversations, these debates, because the conversation itself leads to clarity. And clarity, my friends, leads to action. If you're not sure you believe in God, then it's going to be very hard to believe in the commandments. So if you're struggling with the commandments, it's very possible you're struggling with your belief in God. I often, I'll meet with a lot of people, young people, who are telling me what they're struggling with. I struggle with Shabbat. I struggle with Shabbat because all the too technical details. I'm like, your issue isn't Shabbat, your issue is God. And if your issue isn't God, it's whether or not the system in which God gave us the Torah is a valid system. How do I know this is what God said? How do I know that this is what God really wants? That's a great question, but let's go back. Do you believe in God? Yes. Do you believe in God? Then you believe that God created the world with a purpose, and therefore He must have communicated that purpose. Oh, what was that communication? I believe it happened with Matan Torah. Okay, great. It happened with Matan Torah. How do I know the communication that was given to me is authentic? I get this question a lot. How do I know if God communicated? How do I know if God communicated with me that communication is still the communication that God had given to me? You hear the question? Like, how do I know it's not adulterated? It's on my mind too. That's why I'm asking it.
But there's been a lot of things that over time where people were very wise or others used to be maybe bringing everybody closer, might have had addendum like added little
Right.
make it more
So I want to say that I get that a lot also. My mom does that to me a lot, like how do the rabbis said, and how do I know that's what God wanted? And the truth is, she's right. I don't know. But I do know that if she really cared deeply about the subject matter, she should at the very least know what God wanted. And therefore the gap between what God wants and the rabbis wants are that much. That's it. So we create excuses for ourselves not to do. Now, to answer the question, I'll say it like this. If what I'm saying is true, that, okay, well, God had to communicate with humanity to tell us what the purpose of life is, otherwise life has no purpose. Don't you think He would have created a system that would have ensured its integrity? don't you think he would have created a system that would have ensured its integrity? Right? So now, is it 100% foolproof? The answer is no. It's not. And you know what the proof is? We're having a machloket right now as to what we believe in. Is it a commandment or not? But the fact that we're having the conversation itself is a testament to the system itself. Right? This is the beauty of our faith, that we're not afraid of asking those difficult, challenging questions about, well, what do we believe in? How do I know what's true or not? So now you're left with a choice. You could either become a student of Maimonides or become a student of Nachmanides. I don't care which one you choose, because for me, either one is the right choice. Do you know what I'm saying? Well, Rabbi, how do I know? Should I follow the Shulchan Aruch, or should I follow the Ramah? Should I follow the Mishnah Brura, or should I follow Yakut Yosef? Pick one. Follow it. You're okay. You know what I'm saying? Like, you have a stringency you're not sure about? Ask a rabbi. Go to your LOR, local Orthodox rabbi, your lore, and find out what makes sense for where you are right now and what you should be doing or should not be doing, for that matter. But at the very least, you should be a pursuer of truth and understanding. How are you clarifying what you believe in? So you got lucky, you came to the class today, or you're listening to this class wherever you are, and now you're thinking and asking the question. But remember, the conversation is all about one thing. The conversation, the philosophy is supposed to lead to action. Because thinking and contemplating and going, is nice, but at the end of the day, if what we think doesn't lead to some kind of internal movement or external movement, we're wasting our time. Because you could be lost in thought your whole life and do absolutely nothing. And the Torah is not a Torah just about ideas. The Torah wants you to live a life of action. This is why we say the two most important things in the world for you to be doing is Talmud Torah, the learning of Torah, which is what we're doing right now, and Gemilat Chasadim, doing kindness. Those of you that were here on Sunday and gave the gift of warmth, that's part of that. It's about leading to action. And now Chachamim say, okay, well, if you have to do one or the other, which one's more important? Of course, the rabbi is going to say learning Torah is more important, but only if it leads to action. The purpose of the learning is meant to transform you to become a doer of life, a pursuer of the action the Torah wants us to do. What is the action? What does it want us to do? It wants us to be mindful. It wants us to be thoughtful. It wants us to be grateful. It wants us to say Mizmor LaTodah. And we could say Mizmor LaTodah. Tomorrow's Thanksgiving. That's really what we're saying. We're saying Todah. We're saying Todah La'el. Thank you to God for all the things that we have. The founding fathers of this country, right? The Quakers, right? The Charedim. That's what they were. The Quaking. That's why they chose that. They were the people that were obsessed with how do we build a life of virtue, and virtue can't come from a life of ingratitude. And therefore, the first thing they said is, we're going to say Modeh Ani. And they did this by turkey. Why? I still don't fully understand, but they did. That's what they had back then. It was a chashuv animal, and it was a big new kind of bird that they didn't have in Europe, and they were able to use that as a sort of like an offering to God for feeling the sense of gratitude for having this new land that they found in America, a land where they could choose to practice their faith without the intervention of a government or a king and so on and so forth. All right, let's keep going. We have one more source over here that I want to get through. Okay, back to the Maimonides. Okay, he wrote this. Now you'll notice that in both Rambam and the Ramban, they wrote different books. Okay, you'll notice it's the same author, but they wrote these commentaries in different places, which also means that they clarify their opinions throughout different places in their work. They wrote something in one place, and I'm going to double down on this. Let me explain this a little bit more over here because it wasn't clear over there. And that's what I'm doing for you. I'm showing you in order how they presented this information, and how and hopefully we'll walk away with a little bit more clarity. So Ramban wrote in Hilchot Yesodei Torah, the laws of foundation of Torah, he writes this. He says, the foundation of all foundations and the pillar of all wisdom is to know that there is a first cause. And that first cause created all that exists in the heavens, the earth, and everything between only exists due to the truth of his existence. Now what does he mean over here? Yesodei Yesodot. The foundation of all foundations is belief in God. Why is that the foundation of all foundations? Can we have a conversation about purpose and meaning without God? I'm going to argue no. Can we have a conversation about morality without God? I'm going to say, not really. Why? There are morals in the world. With atheists have morality. Yeah, they do. But their moral principles are Judeo-Christian moral principles. I would like to see a society, atheistic society, that has created a set of morality. Because the truth is, if you want to use their logic to explain the world, you'd say that might makes right. Someone who's stronger is better, is worth more than someone who's weaker, because that's the process of evolution. Evolution is designed to get rid of the weak. And therefore, if you're not fit enough to be alive, you don't deserve to be alive. And using that logic, the Germans were right. Jews, we could kill them. Based on a Darwinian perspective, if I'm stronger than you and you can't overcome my might, then you don't deserve to be alive. No, we obviously reject this idea. We reject this idea. We believe that, that we have a moral responsibility to care for the people around us. There's someone by the name of Peter Singer. Google him. Peter Singer is the head of the philosophy department of morality and ethics at Princeton University. A nice Jewish boy from Australia. He believes, and I know this is going to sound outlandish and crazy, that if your house is on fire and you have a choice between saving your dog or your child, you have a moral responsibility to save your dog first. Why? Because you've unjustly enslaved your dog. And therefore, the moral imperative is on the dog and not the child. Now, we obviously reject this kind of thinking because we believe there's more value to a human being than a dog.
He's teaching this.
Yes, he's teaching this. He's been teaching this for the last 15 years. There's a fascinating article, by the way, with him and this woman, I forget her name, Peter Singer. There was a New York Times article in the New York Times Magazine, had an article with him and another woman, because he also believes that if a child is born with any kind of disability, you should euthanize a child. Up until 2 years, he believes you can euthanize a child.
He has children now?
He has children, yeah. He believes if you have a 2-year-old, before their second birthday, you can kill them. Okay? Now, there was a woman who wanted to debate him. I forget her name. She's a very special lady. She was born with a rare disease where her body didn't produce bones from her neck down. So she's literally a pile of mush. She came from a very wealthy family, super wealthy, and they gave her the best care they could. She's in a special wheelchair. All you see of her, like a bag of a human body with a head on top of it, in a wheelchair. And she gets to move around using her head. Okay, so they spent a week together. She was there to argue, basically, like she's a lawyer. High, powerful, went to really good school, super successful, nothing. So she spends a week with Peter Singer to convince him of his position. Like, you, according to your logic, I should have been killed with this rare disease, but look at all the good that I've done. So in the article, they write about their time together. She's trying to convince him, he's trying to convince her. What does he say to her? He says to her, remember when you were a young girl on the beach, watching all the other kids playing. How did you feel? How did you feel? Would you want that for another person? That feeling of being alone, never being able to do those things, feeling like you were robbed of a life of your youth? And it's so vindictive, manipulative. It was horrible, but it's fascinating to read it because at the end of the article, she agrees with him.
Really?
She agrees with him.
That's so sad.
It's so sad. So sad. Now, if you're coming from a secular place, it makes sense. We should all agree with him. If there's no God, we should all agree with him. Who cares that you're the one? You got lucky. You came from a rich family. You had all the right things lined up for yourself, but most kids don't have that. So you're not the poster child. You're the freak of the successes. But most kids don't have that. Most kids are suffering with that pain. Most kids would elect to not have that kind of a life. Now the truth is that the Gemara actually echoes this sentiment on some level. Gemara says that the Gemara talks about machloket between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, where it asks the question, is it better to have been created or not to have been created? What does the Gemara say? The Academy of Hillel and Shammai argued for a year and a half. Shammai said it's better for man not to have been created. Hillel says it's better to be created. At the end, Hillel agreed with Shammai and said, you're right, it's better for man not to have been created because the chance of sin and destroying our souls is apparent only with birth. Without it, we don't have that. It's better not to have that, take that risk. But Hillel gives a caveat. But since we are created already, we got to make the most of what we have. Now, so this is like heavy stuff, Rabbi. What do I do, right? Now, I would say like this: if you believe there's a God, then you believe in morality, right? There's justice. You believe that there's a moral code that we need to live by. But morality, my friends, should be asking us the following question: how am I being a better person today than I was yesterday? Because most of us think we're good people just because we don't do bad. We avoid doing evil, and therefore we are good. That is not the definition of good. That is just someone who's not doing bad. And the truth is, in Judaism's definition of good, that's actually evil. Right? There are too many good people that watched the Germans wipe out millions of people. They didn't do anything bad. Were they wrong? Did they do anything wrong by not standing up and fighting the Germans? Yes, they did. Apathy is an expression of evil. When we see riots in the street and we do nothing and we let the rioters destroy public property, we are perpetuating the evil. We're causing the evil. When we have a police force and tell them to back down and not to stand up for justice, we are creating evil in the world. That ultimately, we have moral responsibility to get up, to get out, and to maintain justice in the world.
It has become tricky because there is Michael Warren, who was consulate from Israel. He's an American citizen first, and now he's Israeli. He would teach the kids here. He did a whole program with how to handle stuff going on campuses, especially like in the UC system or everywhere. And he said, don't engage. They want to get in your face, to incite you, so they get any kind of attention that they can put. So it's kind of tricky to now go for justice when they've used so much of this.
They're going to say that the real justice is not to do anything because the racism that's inherent in the country is where the real injustice is, which is like a real
It's a complex. So what you're saying, like don't have apathy, not like don't have apathy, but you also because it was hard. Like my son was like leaving this whole pro-Israel thing with a conversation with the Palestinian, whole movement going on, and he was really enraged, like really excited, leaving, and there's taunting them, and have all the signs, and he just said, I kept hearing what the store and said, Ambassador, I kept my head like this, and I was watching it at UCSD campus, and I wanted to they're doing it to get you engaged, so it's a tricky line. We're living in a very
apathy is not just not getting up and fighting against that type of manipulation and distortion. Apathy is also on both sides people not having the courage to have a conversation that's difficult. I don't want to have that conversation. I don't want to talk about whether or not Ben and Jerry's did the right thing or the wrong thing by BDSing the West Bank. I don't have that conversation. If you watch the interview when they asked, I think it was Jerry, about it's a little hypocritical for you to single out Israel when there are other countries who are doing worse things than what's happening in the West Bank. And he's like, yeah, it's a good question. I don't have a good answer. That, my friends, is the greatest expression of apathy. Here's a guy who's motivated by emotions, making massive decisions that are going to impact millions of people around the world. But no care. It's like the stupidest, it's like silly. But as Jews, we reject this. I'm not sure if you've seen this film it was a documentary on Netflix called The Social Dilemma. If you have not watched it, it's definitely worth the hour and a half. Social Dilemma is a awesome documentary that was made by a bunch of executives from Silicon Valley that left the Google, the Facebook, the Apples. I mean, talking about massive executives who basically are sounding the alarm and the concern about what these platforms have created. And it shows you how manipulative and destructive these platforms are, and they know it and they're not doing anything about it. You'll watch this thing. Millions of people have watched it. It was like the number one documentary on Netflix. What have people done now? What kind of action have people taken now that they know that Facebook and your cell phone was designed to manipulate you? You know what happens? Nothing. Why? Can I tell you why, by the way? This is such a powerful idea. Ready? No, that's not why. Your whole lives, you've been brainwashed to receive information and do nothing with it.
Things have to be within your power as well.
It's not in your power just to create a safeguards that you're not being taken in by your social media. If you wake up in the morning,
You as an individual,
if you,
tackle the giant.
I'm not saying you're right. It starts with small things, but at the very least, you know what I'm saying, like do something. Like if you spend an hour and a half watching something about how this thing is manipulating and destroying your life, how could you not spend some time in building some kind of limitations and boundaries for yourself that you're not being taken in by it?
For yourself, yes.
I'm always talking about it for yourself. I'm not talking about it from society. I'm not talking about I can't control what the people around me do. I can only control myself. I can only take responsibility for my actions. Forget about society. Society would be different.
But if we don't contribute to society that way, then we
Again, I'm not saying we shouldn't have smartphones. I'm not saying we shouldn't use social media. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that we should, but we should be aware of what these things are doing and create limitations for ourselves.
had a very interesting, you just brought to mind, when I was in about 5th or 6th grade in public school, we had a teacher, he happened to be Jewish, and he posed the question, if you were in a schoolyard and you saw two kids fighting, would you
Intervene, right.
Would you break it up, somebody, you know? And I was like, of course I would. And then he looked at me and he said, would you really? And then I said, you know what? I probably wouldn't do it because I might get hurt. I wouldn't have the power to
Right.
really break up two strangers on the street. And that really, I'm mentioning it today because here I am and I'm still thinking.
Yeah, but see, but I think that
it's the same kind of dilemma.
No, I disagree with your teacher. What your teacher, if he was a good teacher or she was a good teacher, whoever it was, I would have said to you, you're wrong. That you're right. Maybe you shouldn't insert yourself in the fight, but you could get help. There are things you can do.
Right.
To make it sound like you're helpless as a bystander, you're just watching. I vividly remember. I grew up in a very challenging part of Brooklyn, where it was a very mixed neighborhood. I grew up in a very Italian, Hispanic neighborhood. There were very few Jews. I remember vividly having, these Italian kids chasing after me, making fun of me, spitting at me, fighting with me. I used to fight my whole life. I was fighting for a Jewish identity without really understanding what I was fighting for. Right? I lived in that world, but whenever I saw injustice, I was never afraid to get up and do something. I saw a girl being attacked. I got in. I fought for her. I didn't know who she was. I would get into fights all the time. I would get punched in the face all the time. I didn't care because I always felt a sense of responsibility. I got into the action. That's what this is. Like if we've taken society and created a bunch of people who are just spectators, and this is what this does, by the way. You don't realize it. Like all of you watching this should really be here in person because at the very least, you're here. Because the purpose of this, there's an energy that comes out of coming to a class, not listening to it online, that you're not going to get. This is just information, and therefore information is, what am I going to do with it? You're going to watch The Social Dilemma, and you're going to be like, Rabbi, that was so powerful. Frightening, you're going to come back and tell me. It's frightening. Those are the words you're going to use. That's the adjective you're going to use. But what's going to happen for most people? Nothing's going to change. Why? Because Netflix is a place where I consume media. It's not a place where I make changes. This is a place where you make changes. I had a rabbi who taught us Musar. His name is Rabbi Lawrence Kellman. Right? Lawrence Kellman learned Musar from Rav Volbe. Rav Volbe started a yeshiva in Israel which taught Musar and so on and so forth. And when Rabbi Kellman was coming to America to start teaching these principles of like character development, he said to him, "Why should I travel? I could just start an online school." He's like, "Don't waste your time." He's like, "Why?" He said, "Because online is a medium to share information, not to change people's lives. You can't change online. No one could say, 'Oh yeah, that's my rabbi. I've never met him. I learned all of his classes online.' It doesn't work like that. You need to have it." And he said more than that. He said, spiritually speaking, that change could only happen from people are meeting with people in person. It doesn't happen when you're watching it online. There's something powerfully profound about being in a space with a person where we're sharing our germs with each other, right? There's something about that germinates maybe ideas and action and so on and so forth that doesn't happen in this sterile, communication on what's it called, online. This is what he said, and therefore he encouraged him not to teach his classes online and to just go and do things in person. He created groups of hundreds of people around the country, which come 2 weeks out of the month of America, and travel from place to place to teach these ideas, because the only way to effectuate change is in person and not just online. Again, the purpose of this, the reason why we're having this conversation again is a little bit of a tangent, because really it's about how our belief should lead to action, not inaction. Knowledge, real wisdom and knowledge should lead to action, right? Remember the example I give for the difference between wisdom and knowledge, right? Knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit. Knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is knowing that I could add it to my salad. Right? Wisdom is not just knowing information, it's just having the information. But the application, the wisdom is what I'm interested in. I'm not interested in just information. And the problem with what I call AG after Google, right, versus BG, in the world of AG after Google, we believe we have we know everything, we're good. But what has that done? Nothing. It just paralyzes you. You have all that information in your pocket, and it doesn't make the world a better place. What does it do? It creates an echo chamber for my ideas. It creates more hatred in the world, not less. We know these things, but we're not changing anything. You know why? Money. All right. Let's. I want to finish this. I only have a limited amount of uploading capacity. I have to get this class into less than 60 minutes. Otherwise, I have to cut it up into different pieces. All right. Number 2. If it were imaginable that he did not exist, then nothing else could exist. Therefore, not only is God the foundation of all creation. We're on page number 2, the bottom. We just read number 1 and number 2. If it were imaginable that he did not exist, then nothing could exist. Therefore, nothing can be without God. Number 3. If it were imaginable that nothing else but he existed, he would continue to exist and would not be negated in any way through their negation. This is because all existence needs him, and he, blessed be he, does not need them, not even one of them. Therefore, his truth or reality is not like any other truths. Okay, he is the ultimate expression of truth. God willing, when the new Matrix movie comes out, I will do a deep dive in the Matrix and Kabbalah and teach you a little bit of the principles of Kabbalah through using the film, because the Matrix is a great example of that. The Matrix is a construct that we live in. It is the very fabric of everything. We can't really describe it anyway because you're in it. And therefore, when we talk about God, we're talking about the system that existence exists in. It's very hard to understand what that is, touch it, feel it when you're saturated by it. Okay? So that's what he's saying. That God is the essence of all creation. Number 4, and this is what the Torah means when it says, there is none other than he. That is, there is no true existence besides him. This is what we say when we believe in God. Number 5, this being is the God of the world, master of the earth. He is the controller of the world with a power that is endless and limitless. No limitations to God. The world turns constantly, and it's impossible that it do so without the controller, literally the turner. He, the Blessed One, is the controller who does so without a physical hand or form. That's Maimonides' big argument, that there is a God in the universe. Is that if you look at the nature of the solar system, the universe itself, everything should be at rest, right? Like everything around you should be at rest. The fact that there's something in motion means something pushed it. This cup, if you see it rolling around the floor, right, it's because there's a wind pushing it. Nothing moves on its own. There's always an outside force pushing it. So therefore the world is spinning, right? The solar system is spinning. The universe is in motion, right? That motion is an expression of a force pushing it. I often say, that there is a Big Bang. I believe in a Big Bang. I have no problem with there being a Big Bang, but the question we have to ask is, why was there a Big Bang? Or who was the banger? Okay. Number 5. Number 6. The knowledge of all this is a positive commandment, as it says, I am the Lord your God. And going back to Maimonides' position, which is that God created the world, and therefore Anochi Hashem Elokecha is a commandment. So what do we walk away with? Can you command belief in God? And there's machloket. Okay, that's the answer. Machloket, we don't really know. Depends on who you want to look like. You want to look at Maimonides? Maimonides says yes. Nahmad says no. Nahmad says that no, that belief in God is a precursor to the commandments. And therefore, according to Nahmanides, you can't command belief in God. You first got to get to God on your own. Okay, I believe, it's funny because Maimonides is the ultimate philosopher. He says that no, that you can actually command it, that you can command this belief. And that for him, the command of that belief is understanding what it is that we actually believe in. Those 6 steps of believing in what God is and what God is not is part of the command. Clarifying your mind, understanding the nuances of what we say what we mean when we say believe in God is what Maimonides wants. Nahmanides says no. First get to belief in God, and then we get to the commandments. Therefore, you cannot command belief. But ultimately, what they both agree on is that whether or not you believe it's a command or not, they both should do one thing: lead to action. Everyone agrees that. The purpose of this exercise, of having this conversation, is to clarify for ourselves what it is that we believe in so that we can hopefully move into a place of more clarity and more action. That's what I want. I'm not just giving the class for the sake of edutainment, right? The class is given, hopefully, for the sake of inspiration, motivation, clarity, or even better, to create an issue that you have, because the issues motivate us also. It doesn't always have to come from a positive place, it can come from a negative place. All those things are true. May we be blessed with the clarity of recognition that there is a one God who is intimately involved in our lives, who is the source of all that we have and all that we don't have, and that we use all that knowledge to lead ourselves into a direction of growth, of spiritual prosperity, of material prosperity, of marital prosperity, and all the things that we need. Have an amazing day. Thank you so much for listening. Yeah. Wow.
Time is coming up.